Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Grow Sessions. I am your host, Mark Doherty. Really grateful to be here again. This is the third opportunity I've had stepping in to the role here hosting Grow Sessions. Really grateful for everybody that's tuning in, streaming, listening, watching the videos online, and checking things out and joining us. And I've had some really interesting conversations thus far. Today, I'm really excited to bring Drew Greco, a grower who I've known for many years. We go back, having met on a project back in Massachusetts 8, 9 years ago, something like that. Seems like 100 years ago. I always say our industry, we age in dog years. So happy to have Drew with us today and welcome and thanks for joining me, man.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm honored to be on here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Drew, I know you as a cultivator. That's where we first met. Tell me a little bit about, we met, I think it was Happy Valley, right? Was the
Correct.
project that you were a cultivator and I was at that time working in, design and selling equipment and doing all that kind of stuff on that project. But tell me what led up to that, point in time? What's the history? How'd you get into cultivation? How'd you get into cannabis?
So I grew up on the East Coast. I really don't consider myself a legacy cultivator because I didn't cultivate on the East Coast. I was way too scared to try and put plants into my closet in North Carolina. But I moved out to Colorado in early 2011 and immediately started working at a hydroponic shop. And I was just picking the brain of all the growers that would come in, trying to get little tips and tricks from them. Set up a couple lights in my basement. And then there was a guy who owned a dispensary and a grow a couple blocks away from the hydro shop. And he would come in to buy all his supplies there. And I begged him for a job for, I think, like a year and a half. And he finally had a trimmer quit. So he brought me in as a trimmer. And I think like a month after that, one of his growers quit and he let me take that grower position. And I just fell in love, man. Being around the plants, just watching the different growth stages, it was just incredible to me and so much fun to be able to drive that production in the way that we wanted to do it. I started working with him in 2013, and then in 2014, Colorado went rec, and all these huge grows down in Denver started popping up, and I kind of saw the trajectory of the industry, and I knew that if I could learn how to grow at a larger scale, that I could probably always have a career in this industry doing what I really enjoyed doing. So I moved from northern Colorado down into Denver and started working for some of the biggest grows in Denver just as a general laborer. My first position with the Green Solution, I was just emptying 75-gallon reservoirs and scrubbing them out and refilling them all day long for 8 hours a day.
Were
Um,
you, I gotta hang on just a quick, I gotta interrupt you real quick. I apologize, but you mentioned TGS. Was that the facility where it was just like two big massive rooms and pallet racking to the ceiling and it was
yes,
like
sir.
5 tier in parts of it? Were you working in that facility?
I was.
Man,
Uh, so I helped them kind of build out the second phase. I was, I think, in like the third or fourth wave of hires that they did. So they opened up that first phase first, and then in the second phase, I was, attaching the anchors to the top of the light reflectors so that we could fix them to the top of those racks, installing all of the irrigation tubing and getting the trays set up on the racks and getting everything ready to open that place up, and then cleaning out reservoirs in that first phase all day long.
yeah, that man, that is from a commercial scale cultivation standpoint. I mean, that was super early. And I remember at that point in time, a lot of the ideas, right, of going vertical like that, bigger spaces and especially the verticality of it seemed like really good ideas,
Yeah.
like on paper. And then when it came to operations, a lot of challenges. So it sounds like you were in there, hands in the dirt, so to speak, right? Doing the work, doing the labor, really learning it from the ground up and in a pretty complex environment to cultivate plants
Yeah,
overall.
man, it was intense. I mean, we worked on crown lifts, and they made custom platforms for the forks of the lift to drive into, and we would have to harness ourselves to the lift, and then it would raise us up, 30 feet in the air to get up to that fifth level. Um, and like you said, in theory, it made a lot of sense to go vertical and use that upward space, but the engineering hadn't caught up with the ideas yet, and there was no airflow up there. It was just it was a mess.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I think that a lot of times people, walk in after the fact, right, and see those types of decisions or any of the myriad of decisions we've seen since, right? Especially with cannabis, because cannabis has really pushed the technology, it's really pushed the design side of indoor agriculture,
yeah,
especially, right? And
absolutely.
so we can all walk in 18 months into somebody's operation and go, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have done that, or whatever, right? But in the
Yep,
moment, I think there's something to be said for people that are willing to risk pushing the boundaries, right?
definitely.
Just
Yeah,
like the first adopter of LEDs, right?
sure.
They
Yep,
weren't great, there were problems, but there had to be a first adopter. Somebody has to go first and see it through. So you're working in there and you're in Colorado and it's really the boom time, right? Here
yeah,
in Colorado. I'm in Colorado, I'm in northern Colorado. Um, so back then it was really the boom time. Like you said, a lot of big grows getting built and a lot of excitement and cash
yep.
flow. And so you're in that. So keep going. So you're there and what's next?
So I bounced around to a couple different grows. I worked under Rob Janey at True Cannabis for a little over a year. I really credit him with showing me how to set up a production set schedule in a commercial facility. He had things pretty dialed in the facility that we were running. Every single week we were pulling down a certain number of rows out of every room, so it was a perpetual facility.
Mm.
um, and he really taught me the basics about setting up a schedule, being able to stay on schedule, and how important that is to the cash flow of the business. He also taught me a whole lot about plant health, irrigation, and environmental controls also. So I give him a lot of credit for kind of giving me the base of my knowledge for commercial cultivation. Um,
Wow. So you're getting the like the hands-on and also this business sense, right? Which is like you're saying, right? If we can't predict our harvest schedule, we can't predict our cash flow.
right.
We're gonna end up short somewhere. So really, really great. I mean, early, especially in those early days when it was the heyday kind of vibe, right?
Yeah.
So how do you end up from like you're here in Colorado and how do you end up back east where we ran into each other for the first time?
So I got my first management position in Colorado. I had a buddy who was consulting for this spot called Mayflower Farms. My buddy Willie Gardner, he brought me in as the day-to-day manager because he couldn't be there physically every day. So he needed somebody that he could trust. He brought me in as the manager. We really turned that facility around. I think when we walked in, they were averaging about 45 grams per square foot. We got them up to around 70, 75 grams per square foot, and the owner decided he wanted to sell. So he sold to a extraction company that was already running in Denver, and they had a cultivation crew so they came in, they fired all the managers and pretty much just kept the labor employees at that facility. So I went out to Cali for a couple months. I had a buddy who was opening up a new facility, helped him for about 4 months. And while I was there, I got the offer for Happy Valley in Massachusetts.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
so in
Nice.
January of 2019, I flew from California out to Massachusetts and started my journey with Happy Valley.
So before we get into like going into that East Coast, Massachusetts, and again, you entered Mass really in the heyday of
Yeah.
it flipped to adult use, a lot of money, bigger grows, right?
Yes.
Bigger grows than what had been really typically been being built west at that time. a lot more advancement in controls, a lot more
Yes.
advancement in irrigation, in just the general building style as well, I would say became very advanced, and Mass was on that cusp. But you said something a second ago about improving the yields. And I think it's really interesting because it's something we obviously look at a lot today. When you said they were averaging about 45 grams a square foot, you got them up to 70, 75 grams a square foot. But what I think is interesting and what I'd love to hear your thoughts on is that given the timeline and the location, my guess is they were double-ended HPS flower rooms. Is
Yes,
that
sir.
accurate?
Yep.
So at that point in time, 60-ish was doing pretty good under double-ended HPS. We were typically building indoor flower rooms using double-endeds to about 800 ppfd.
Yep.
And so if you're saying there were 45, yeah, not great, but not as horrific as maybe some things we've seen. So you take them to 70, 75. But today, if we go all the way forward to today, the way we're doing that is we're just applying way more light, right?
Yep.
So you went under 800 ppfd-ish to this significant increase. Today we would just go, well, you're 1,000 ppfd. Let's just swap all the lights out and go to 1,500, and everything's going to be a banger, right?
Right.
So how were you back then without increasing light, or maybe you did? How were you achieving that increase in grams per square foot yield?
We did not increase light. We didn't do anything to the infrastructure of the building. We increased plant count by about double in every single room.
Mm,
Um, Luckily, the HVAC and dehumidification in the building was enough to keep up with that, and a little bit of irrigation strategy. This was before the crop steering fad had hit, really, but we did use a version of pulse irrigation, I would call it.
mhm.
We fed smaller shot sizes once an hour throughout the day. We weren't chasing drybacks like everyone is now, but we were spacing out that irrigation throughout the day. And I think that really makes a huge difference. When we got in there, they were flowering in 5 gallon pots with soil. They would have one big watering event in the morning, like an hour or 2 hours after the lights came on, and then they wouldn't get watered for the rest of the day. They would just dry out for the rest of the day. Um, so we switched to a 3 gallon pot with cocoa, and changed that irrigation schedule so that they were getting fed all throughout the day. And like I said, we pretty much doubled the plant count in each room. So that's really what gave us those extra grams.
So what do you think about today, this chasing the high ppfd? Especially we're seeing it in indoor cultivation where, like I said, it was 800. Then when decent, like good LEDs hit the market, we started really designing to 1,000 with the good
Yep.
LEDs. Then it went to 12. Now I'm hearing 15s from people. What do you think about that?
Um, I see the science and the logic behind it. A part of me feels like pushing that hard, especially with if you have a new grower or someone that's not doesn't have the experience to understand the cues from the plants, that's really dangerous. Um, I my I my philosophy is that there's 5 limiting factors in your grow room: temperature, humidity, CO2, lights, and your irrigation. And those all work like a puzzle together. And if one of those factors is not uh, at the level that you want it to be, that you have to reduce all of the other factors because they're not going to work together the way that you want them to. So if you have a perfect environment where you can control your temperature and RH to the perfect VPD that you want at every stage, then you can really push those drybacks in your irrigation, and you can push your PPFD to pretty significant levels, and you will see more yield and better plant health from that. But if your facility can't hold temperature and RH, and you have crazy swings and you try to push your drybacks and try to push your PPFD to 1,500, you're just going to see problems.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's a really good point, right? That it's all interlocked, and these variables, you can't change one without changing typically all the others, but
Right.
you're always moving the sliders, right, on those things. And as we're applying more and more light, that environmental control becomes even more critical. I always equate it to, at 1,000 ppfd, you're driving your car at 100 miles an hour. And there's a lot of people that can drive down the highway at 100 miles an hour pretty successfully, right? Living here in Colorado, every time I go to the airport, I witness
You're
this.
doing it.
Uh,
Yeah.
so, but then you go to 1,200 to 15. All of a sudden, things are moving way faster. So it's
And
not
it's
integrates
exponentially faster
exponential.
also. It's not just that 20 ppf or 200 ppfd push, like it's
Yeah,
exponentially faster.
it is. And so with that, what do you think about under canopy?
I am a fan. I personally don't have them in the garden right now. I did work at a little facility here in Las Vegas that had inter-canopy or under canopy lighting, and I definitely see the advantages to it. But it's the same thing. If your environment is off or your irrigation is off, then you're not going to see the results that you're looking for from the plants.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
we
absolutely.
definitely did see an increase in the A buds from that facility with the under canopy lighting. There was no popcorn or like larvae flower at the bottom of the plants. So even just not having that 10 or 20% of larf and popcorn and being able to send all of your flower as top grade material makes a pretty big difference in most markets.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting to me. I mean, my thing for years has always been, the integration of the science and art of cultivation with the technology and the equipment and the mechanical side of things. And so it is really interesting to me looking at, moving the light source to better serve the plant, the structure of
Right.
the plant, the way we grow it. One of the things I think is really interesting, I was at a conference. I met a gentleman from Holland who runs a research facility over there, and he's working on just side lighting, where they
Oh,
really aren't
wow.
applying any top lighting to the plant and just taking all the energy into the side lighting or the under canopy lighting. And some of the results look pretty good. It's pretty interesting. Like
That's pretty
it really,
cool.
there's so much, there's so much to experiment and learn with. But
Absolutely.
so, so I had cut you off there. So I'm curious, you're in Colorado, things are ramping up pretty quickly out here. Then you end up in Cali for a little bit, and then you go to this new startup in Massachusetts. And I was part of that build out. I was part of that design, so I'm really pretty familiar with it. It was more advanced, right? My experience
Yes.
tipping up grows on the East Coast in those days. And so we're talking like what, 14, 15, 16, something in there. Um, that, they were bringing to the table really sophisticated architects and engineers who were really good at being architects and engineers and had no clue how to build a grow.
Yep.
And that's not, I'm not disrespecting them. I'm just saying
No.
the engineers did not understand transpiration. They didn't
Right.
understand how to calculate sensible and latent loading properly for the environment. So we ended up with a lot of very expensive per square foot facilities that could not control their environment when they turned them on for the first time, things like
Yeah.
that. But at the same time, we were playing with really advanced irrigation systems, really advanced computerized control systems, stuff that was coming out of General Horty ag greenhouses, Dutch equipment, things like that. So, what was your experience walking into that?
Um, it that facility is the greatest learning experience I've had in my career for sure. As you know, they had the full Argus system, Argus controls for environment in all of the rooms, and they had the Argus skid for irrigation. Um, I had never used an injection skid for irrigation before that. All of my facilities were hand mixing. We had a liter pump under a 250-gallon tote that was set on a light timer, and it would open up and water every single hour. So this facility was was pretty state of the art, and it was my first time using a real control platform like Argus. Um, so it was definitely a learning curve, and it was really cool to be able to take my experience with visually seeing how plants respond to the the things that we're putting into them or the things that we're doing with them, and then trying to get the computer to do those same things instead of me or a person going in there and doing those things. Um, there's definitely a learning curve with the Argus skid. The maintenance and the cleaning, I think, was the biggest learning curve for me. I remember we let our I think it was the calcium injector. We didn't clean that for a couple months. We didn't have like a PM schedule set up when we first got in there, and that thing got super clogged up. And we were getting whole crops that at the end of the crop were like rusting out leaves and getting super purple stems. And visually we're going in the room and we're like, these plants aren't getting any calcium. But then we're going back down to the skid, and no, the calcium's set up and it's injecting properly. But then when you actually take the whole skid apart and get into those little tiny injectors, we found out that it was completely clogged up, and we really weren't getting the calcium that we thought we were getting to those plants. So um, the technology is awesome. It just becomes a different animal of what you need to be looking at and maintaining throughout the grow cycle.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say the technology piece of it, right? I mean, the maintenance piece is something that I think a lot of cultivators that I've seen like on this, particularly in the cannabis side, struggle with, like the value of preventative maintenance, the value of competent facilities teams, and I'm biased. I
Yeah.
manage facilities teams as a big portion of what I do, but I'm biased to them for sure, and their importance. But I don't know what the resistance is. There's this idea of like, well, we spent $500,000 on this particular piece of equipment. It should just run indefinitely without ever
Right.
changing oil. Like it's like thinking like because I bought a Ferrari, I should never change the oil. I should never, have to put new tires on it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What do you think the pushback is on that? Like, why don't people see the value? And that's not saying everybody. It's not a blanket statement, right? But
Yeah.
I've run into it more often than not.
I my personal opinion and what it was for us is we wanted to be in the rooms with the plants. I didn't want to be in the watering room doing maintenance on that machine. And we did have a facilities guy who was there to keep up with maintenance and everything. But like you said, you need a team in these facilities. Even if you have just one maintenance person that's running around with a like a chicken with his head cut off, he can't really get to all
Yeah.
of the problems by himself. Um, so it was a little bit of ignorance. We didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know that we needed to be so um, faithful about doing the preventative maintenance and maintaining these machines. Our facilities guy had no cultivation experience before, so he didn't know anything about this type of machine or this type of control system that we were using. So I think, especially back then, it was just a little bit of we didn't really know. And then also, the cultivators want to be in the room with the plants, man. They don't want to be maintaining equipment all day long. So I
Mm.
think that has a lot to
Yeah.
do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. No, I agree. It really takes a robust team for sure on both sides, right? The facility side,
Absolutely.
the cultivation side. But I always say, with as advanced as the cultivation has become, we got to have both. They got to really work lockstep. They're equally important,
Yep.
because it is so technologically advanced. So, in your opinion, what is, with all the technology available to us in cultivation, what is the most important piece?
Hmm. Um, I'm going to lean towards environmental control because I personally think that that is the biggest factor in producing a quality crop. Um, you can have kind of subpar irrigation and subpar uh, plant techniques like pruning and trellising and stuff like that, and still come out with a decent crop if your environment is correct. Um, so I really think the HVAC units that they're building now, the dehumidification units, and the control platforms that are running those are probably the most important.
Yeah, yeah. I tend to agree. I've often said, if you can't control your environment, you can't predict your yield. And like we were saying at the beginning, if you can't predict your yield, you can't manage the books,
Yep.
right? You can't manage cash flow. So, you're out there. You said that, this is one of the greatest teaching environments that you've had was this experience in Massachusetts. So what else about it was educational for you or eye-opening?
That was the largest crew that I've ever run.
Yeah.
And once you get into large scale cultivation, the team is one of the most important things. Like obviously the environment and your equipment is the top thing, but if all of your cultivators are butting heads and arguing and not getting along with each other, nothing is going to get done. So that's where I really started to look at myself as a cultivation coach more than a manager or a cultivation manager. I joke sometimes and just say that I'm a glorified babysitter because I'm just dealing with my employees' uh, egos and attitudes all day long. Um, but that was really the biggest learning experience for me, how to get 20 different people onto the same page, understanding what we are trying to do and why we are trying to do things, and then keeping them motivated to continue doing those things correctly.
Yeah, it's people intensive, right? It still is, even with push towards maybe more automation and things like that. But yeah, it's like my phrase is people plans profits.
Yep.
And if you do, I always say if you do the first two right, you get the third.
Yep.
But it's always people first. And one of the things that I think gets missed, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is I believe the energy of the crew, the energy of the team translates to the plants. So
100%.
there's people out there that, for forever and ever and ever. I can remember being a little kid and hearing about people who would play music for their plants.
Yep.
And there's been, I think people have tried to prove or disprove that that's theoretically viable, that plants will respond to this external stimuli. But I think it's on that sort of energetic field range of things that I don't understand, that I can't explain, but it's just what I've experienced. Happy people, happy plants. And I'll tell you, there was a grower that I was working with, and he was in Massachusetts as well. And he just crushed every grow, didn't matter how it was designed, whatever, he just crushed. And I knew him as a good guy, but I knew him personally, so I didn't work for him. And one day I was in a brand new grow that he was just firing up, and there was a garden worker that was transporting veg plants from veg into flower down a corridor. And he had a big cart with all the veg plants, and not all of them, but some veg plants on it. And as he was going through doors, again, brand new facility, the doors shut and just annihilated the cart full of plants. And just, I mean, literally, I watched plants just get sliced in
Yeah.
half, like a
Yeah.
sword went through them, right? And my buddy, the grower, he stopped. We were having a conversation. He stopped. He went over, asked the kid if he was all right, made sure he was not hurt, and then helped him pick up. And when I first saw it happen, I thought, well, this could go one of two ways.
Right.
This guy could completely lose his shit on this kid, right? Because he just destroyed however many plants at X value, especially back then in Massachusetts when, there was like no wholesale, no middleman, and they were getting top dollar for every bud.
Right.
Um, and instead he was kind and gentle and a good leader, right? And I go, okay, this is why this guy crushes everywhere he goes,
Yep.
because of his leadership. So, do you think that there's a viable do you think it's viable that the energy that our team brings is translating to our plans?
100%. Anytime I work with a new team, that's one of the first conversations that we have. I firmly believe that plants take in energy just like we do, and they can feel the energy that you're putting off when you're in the room and when you're working with them. Um, I always tell crews that I work with, like if you're fighting with your wife or your significant other or your kids at home and you bring that energy into the facility, the plants feel it. Um, so I'm very, a lot of people that I work for don't really like this, but I'm very lenient about people taking time off, people staying at home when they're in a horrible mood. I just, if I don't want you in the facility, if you're going to bring that energy, it's not worth it for the team or the company or the goal that we have and we're trying to reach.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's interesting, right? We've got these living, breathing organisms that we're raising, right? I always say we build a living, breathing machine around them to whether it's greenhouse, warehouse, whatever type of cultivation, we build this thing. And then so often we don't get the living, breathing people that are literally touching the plant, literally brushing against it, literally speaking in front of it. Thousands of these organisms, right? So yeah, it's cool to hear, man. I mean,
And
so
really, in my opinion, that's one of, I think one of the things that's the hardest about scaled cultivation. There's an unlimited number of people out there that can grow beautiful plants. There's an unlimited number of people out there that can run a basement or a medium-sized facility. But once you start putting the people in there, um, I really like, I feel like a lot of the legacy cultivators, they were in their basement by themselves giving love to these plants, but they don't have that same uh, reaction or love between the people that they're working for. And so it's hard for some of these really amazing cultivators to come and lead a big team because they're not used to doing that. They don't have those personal skills. They're just used to being by themselves with their plants, and it's it doesn't translate once you try to scale.
yeah, plants don't talk back, but they do punish us by getting sick,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I think that's the other piece to the human side of it, because because it's so human centric, this cultivation practice that we've developed. Um, if we've got an employee that's in the garden that sees something wrong, they if they don't believe that leadership gives a shit about them, they may not say something. Like they
Yep.
might see PM and then just say, well, you know what, it's time for my break.
Yep.
Yep, tough, right? These guys don't
Yep.
love me. They don't care about me.
Right.
Mark's an asshole, and so I'm not gonna say anything about the PM that I just saw in the corner of the room, right?
Right.
And then if the DOC or whoever is so busy managing, doing the paperwork, updating the timesheets or whatever they're tasked with doing, and they're not walking the garden every inch of the garden every day, then this is how things get missed and turn into 911, 911
Yep.
emergency situations, right?
Yep.
We're about to, crash a room. So, yeah. So, so you're in Massachusetts, you're working this more, bigger crew, more technology, all these kinds of things. Did you end up going from there back out to Vegas to where you are now and getting back into greenhouses? Is that kind of how you transitioned?
I didn't come directly into a greenhouse. I did go from Massachusetts here to Vegas. The cold weather in Massachusetts was killing me.
Yeah.
In I remember
Yeah.
April of 2019, that first year that I was there, it rained 29 out of the 30 days of the month. And it's just like, man, this is not the environment for me. I was starting to get in my head and it was affecting my life. So I had a buddy who had a management contract with a license owner out here and he needed somebody to run the garden. And I made the move to a much warmer environment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Much warmer, drier, right?
Yep.
In Nevada, certainly than Massachusetts. So
Yep.
you're out there, you end up back out there, or where you are now. And I know that now you're managing in greenhouse, or you've been working in the greenhouses. What is the biggest difference for you between an indoor, how you're running crops in indoor environments? Obviously we tend to run a shorter crop, we tend to run a smaller crop, right? There's all those kinds of like environmental, the way the rooms are set up, the way we might stack, or versus like a greenhouse where we tend to get a little bit bigger crop size, things like that. What's the biggest changeover? From a cultivator and an operator's mentality, what's the biggest difference for you?
For For me, it really was just the way we prune and defoliate the plants. I feel like with the we we can't hold the environment the same way that we do in an indoor facility, in an indoor room. So we do have a pretty good fluctuation in temperature and humidity throughout the day. And I personally believe that leaving more foliage and leaf material on the plant helps them regulate their internal temperature and their transpiration better than completely stripping the plant like you can in an indoor facility.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it goes back for me, it goes back to like we were having the conversation about light intensity. And I was having this conversation with our national head of cultivation the other day, where we're talking about adding, top light intensity and under canopy light at the same time, right? So you're getting into this like 1400 ppfd applied to the plant space. And the room we were in where there's some testing, some under canopy lights being tested, had just been defoliated. And I said, all the solar panels are gone.
Yep.
Somewhere in here, I don't know how to make sense of this, that we're giving more and more photons, and at the same time, we're taking away the solar panel of the plant. Like,
Right.
so it's really interesting too, because we're taking away the plant's ability to transpire, but we're still having to apply all this water. And so, yeah, I think you're onto something, that there's maybe we're overdoing it even on indoor. Maybe we're
Right.
overdoing it a little bit, and I think it's for fear of mold, PM and things, that crop up, airflow, right? Those types of reasons. But so your
Yeah.
experience is in the greenhouse, you're leaving more on the plant, not defoliating as hard.
Yes. And even, I mean, back when the Three Alight crew came out and they were completely stripping plants
Stripped.
in Denver, and
Yeah.
that was when I was at that Mayflower facility, and we did that, but not to the level that they were doing it. We always thought like these plants need some kind of leaf material on them to help them transpire and control their internal temperature.
Hmm.
So we did like a very limited version of that Swazi tech.
Hmm.
But yeah, in the greenhouses, I do even less than that. When I train my crew, um, we have 3 layers of trellis on every single bench, and I train them to prune and defoliate by layer of trellis. So everything under the first trellis I want stripped off the plant because it's not going to make it into the canopy. Those leaves are going to die off first anyway from not getting the same amount of light from the top of the plant. And then we work from the bottom of the plant up, defoliating heavier at the bottom and then lighter as we get through those layers of trellis.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're looking at too, like with the greenhouse, you mentioned the environmental control, and I've been, part of teams where we've had greenhouses and indoors and stuff, and yeah, you don't, somebody said to me, I can't take credit for this quote. I don't know who said it. I wish I did. I would give them credit, but you know, in the indoor you play God, in a greenhouse you play with God,
Yep.
and you do not have that precise control that we're trying to exert in indoor. And yet, I see some real fire coming out of greenhouses.
Yeah.
And so there's something to be said for a greenhouse in the right external environment. So where it's going
Yes.
to be, you know, sunny and dry, Southern Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona,
Arizona. Yep.
Arizona, big time, right? That's where a greenhouse does really, really well. They become a lot easier to manage. Obviously, these greenhouses that they pop up in the Northeast and stuff like that, we all know growers that have worked those houses, really hard to manage.
Yep.
Really, really difficult stretches in those greenhouses. And then once it gets perfect environmentally, you don't have enough sun. Once you have enough sun, the environment goes to shit. You can't cool it, you can't dehue properly. So, how do you, as a grower, knowing though that even in a great environment, you've got to deal with the fluctuation of the day, the changes in wind direction, speed externally, things like that as you adjust how your house is functioning. How do you still grow great plants like without that super control that we spend a lot more on in the indoor?
The plants are resilient. They can handle so much more than we think that they can. Um, using DLI and like a daily temperature range, I guess you call it, um, and differences in night and day temperature, I think have been huge in the greenhouse. So the DLI, a plant can only intake a certain amount of light throughout the day. So making sure that on our days in May, April, June, July, when that sun is scorching and we're hitting almost 1500 ppfd in the middle of the day,
Mm.
that we're shading our greenhouses a little bit earlier than we would in the winter because they're getting the amount of light that they need in a shorter amount of time in the summer. Um, I've been reading a lot of research about uh, the like a daily temperature. So if we're hitting 100 in our greenhouse during the middle of the day, if we can keep our nighttime temperatures 50 or 60 degrees, that averages out to like a 75, 80-degree temperature, and the plants can handle it. We don't see any adverse reactions or any burning or anything. So it becomes more of a overall whole holistic approach instead of really focusing on when just the lights are on. I feel like in indoor growing, a lot of people don't talk about their nighttime temperatures and humidity and what they're doing at night to keep the plant um, transpiring the way that it should be at night. Um, it's it's more important in the greenhouse than I think it is in indoor.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you're saying you're looking at, research or people who are indicating that if we look at like an average daily, just like we look at a DLI, the daily integral of light, we look at an average daily temp, where do we fall on the day? I was out in Oregon last week, and I was in one of the outdoor fields, and it was like 95 degrees, and under the sun it felt hotter.
Yeah,
And then that night it went to 50,
yeah,
and the plants were just, a couple weeks away from harvest and just loving it. Just, and dry. I mean, that's always I think the key
yeah, for
factor
sure.
is dry. So in your greenhouse, are you manually like making those decisions on a daily basis, looking at the data, looking at the weather, looking at all this information, taking that in, and then making decisions and control, using your control systems to adjust your screens, to adjust your shade, to adjust all these things, your lights,
Yep,
and I assume you have supplemental light as well.
we
Um,
do. I have 3 rooms with double-ended HPS, and we have 2 rooms with LED.
mhm,
We're the whole greenhouse is controlled by Link 4, which is a pretty good control system. Their
mhm.
software is super user friendly. I love that. It's way more easier to get into their software and be able to figure out things than if you open up the Argus platform for the first time.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Argus is it's a steep learning curve. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I set auxiliary controls for every day. I don't want my rooms going over 90 degrees for the most part. So especially in the later weeks of flower and the first 3 weeks, I pretty much run them wide open, and they can, as long as the nighttime temperatures and the daytime temperatures are hitting the average that I want to, we run them pretty wide open. Once we get into like week 4 and 5, I set auxiliary control at a temperature limit. So if the room gets up to 86 degrees, our thermal shade pulls, and it's still letting in light, but it's blocking the radiation from the sun. And then if the room continues to climb, which really only happens in the summer months when it's 120 out, our blackout will pull to 50% at 88 degrees. If it keeps going up and gets to 90, the blackout will pull completely. And then we still have the lights on in the room, and that really it brings the temperature down like almost immediately. And
Yeah.
the rooms are a lot easier to control with the blackout fully pulled, but we're losing light, so we're losing a little bit of yield. Um, I really think that with greenhouses, having different different routes for your product is very, very key. So here, like early November through the end of April is our best growing season. That's when we get the best quality and the best yield. So we're trying to send the majority of our flower at that time to packaged flower from those harvests.
Mm,
Once we get into May, June, July, August, the radiation from the sun, the intense light, the quality declines significantly. Our test results come back, 5 to 10% lower on THC, and sometimes up to a whole 1 or 2% lower on terpenes. So most of that biomass we're trying to send to a lab to get made into distillate. So we're still profiting off of that those crops, but
yeah.
it's not as high of a profit as we would in our winter months when we're really putting out really good flower.
So you're saying that as light intensity increases, the ability to control the environment decreases and quality decreases as a
Yeah.
result of that.
So
So
we're just pad and fan. I don't have any HVAC
you don't have a
or
wet wall?
dehumidifiers. We do,
You have a
yeah,
wet wall? Yeah.
every room is just controlled by a wet wall and
Wet
our
wall. Yeah.
exhaust fans and gable fan.
Yep.
So, when it's 120 degrees outside, I can run the wet wall nonstop and keep the room under 90 degrees, but
Right.
I can't get the RH less than 60%. And when you
Right.
get into those final weeks, then I'm fighting the PM and fighting bud rot and stuff like that. So,
Sure. Sure.
um, it makes sense to close those blackouts, get a little bit less yield, but it's still sellable flower. Because if we
Yeah.
mold out the whole crop, then we just lose everything. So
Right. Got it. So it's really interesting to me and you know when you're looking at it, you've got a very, learning, boots on the ground, starting with cleaning reservoirs all the way up to running big crews, big complex grows, both indoor and greenhouse. But then one of the things that I also hear you talking about is profitability, which is not just I'm here to grow the best plant, but I'm here to really think about how do we, like you brought up, different uh, paths for your product to become different SKUs based on something as, somewhat complex as the time of year it's grown in and the fact that it's grown in a greenhouse and that's going to vary in quality and things like that. And there's been a couple of things you mentioned, right, that you're really looking at things economically as well. We see a lot of companies in our space now more than ever, and it seems to be maybe accelerating. It seems to come in spurts though too. People, going into receivership, turning over licenses here in Colorado. We see more where just licenses just don't get renewed, or you hear about, oh yeah, that greenhouse over there that's been operating for the last 6, 7 years. The lights are off now. They're all gone. They're just
yep,
done. Bigger companies, the MSOs of the world, go into receivership, auction off their properties. These types of things are happening. They're going under. What, why are people struggling to be profitable, to have free cash flow, to pay the bills? Like where is the error? Where is the mistake
um,
from your point
I
of view?
think it's the compression of most of the markets. I mean, back in Colorado in 2014, 2015, when everyone was getting $3,000 for a pound, like you could grow a pound for $2,000 and still make money. You could waste money on uh, foliar sprays every single day and waste money on labor and doing different pruning techniques to every single plant and stuff like that. And once the market started compressing and people were only getting $700 for a pound, now those people that were making money before, kind of wasting labor and wasting resources, they're losing money now. So
Mm,
um, being able to produce a high quality product for the lowest amount of money that you possibly can is really the only way to make money in this business. And I think it was kind of a slap in the face to a lot of people. Nobody really saw it coming. It happened pretty quickly. And there were, some places that were really well funded and they could afford to waste that money for 2 or 3 years. But after that 2 or 3 years, when they hadn't figured out how to produce a crop for less money, they're shutting down. There's, just like a few of the facilities that I've worked at, the owner's been putting in his life savings for 2 years and starting to dig into his kid's scholarship funds for college and stuff like that, and they're just like, this doesn't make sense for me. I'm not going to do this business anymore. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of the owners and a lot of the people with the money don't really care about cannabis or the cannabis industry. They're not in it for the culture or for the love of the plant. They're just in it to make money. And once they're not making money, it doesn't make sense for them anymore.
How low do you think we could bring the cost to produce a pound?
Indoors, I think like 250, $300 range, obviously depending on the size of the facility. My experience, labor, electrical, and water are the three highest cogs in any cultivation facility. So a lot of my experience throughout the years has been trying to produce the same quality with the least amount of labor. Trying, like, once the more you touch the plant throughout the flower cycle, the higher your cost per pound is going to be. So if you can, in theory, put those plants into a flower room and not have anyone go in there and not touch them the entire time, your cost per pound is going to be significantly lower than if you're sending them in there 4 or 5 times to defoliate and bend branches every other day to weave through trellis and things like that. So there's just a lot of processes that you can do in a smaller garden that still makes sense in a smaller garden if you only have a couple of laborers and they're going in and knocking stuff out really fast. But once you get into rooms with 1,000 plants where you need 6, 7, 8 people to go in and defoliate a whole room, and it might take 2 days, that's a really big cost.
Yeah, so you see, I agree with you. I think labor is the lever that we can pull that's going to have the biggest impact. You know, if the facility is built electrically efficiently, right? If
Right.
there's
Yep.
quality LEDs, other systems in place that are electrically efficient to the degree we can with an indoor, and even with a greenhouse. But labor becomes the one that you really have to watch. And we were talking about it earlier. The three light right methodology was wildly labor intensive, right?
Crazy. Yeah.
And so yeah, they seem to be getting these really good results. But if you went near any one of their facilities in Denver, they had like two or three. You couldn't park within like 6 blocks of the place because it was all
Right.
employees parked in like in the neighborhoods and in the side streets and all that shit. So,
Yep.
the labor is so key. Do you see like what is the there's less touches, right? But then we get into the argument over like if you're not bending the branches and putting them in the trellis properly, then you're not gonna get the bud right there, and it's not gonna develop. It's not the light and the shading and all the reasons why we do that. Um, what's the best way to reduce labor, like from your experience?
Um, Correct plant count for the square footage of bench space or the room that you have, and going back to being able to control the environment. If I believe if you have the proper environment that you can keep within the parameters that you want, that you really don't have to do all that training and bending of branches. I've stopped topping most of the strains that we grow as well.
Mm,
Just letting that apical meristem show its dominance, and then that really comes down to how you space each strain out on your benches. So,
yeah.
my Chem 91 that stretches pretty crazy and gets to be a big plant has less number of plants on a bench than my Bubba Kush or something that grows short and squat, and we can really stuff in and hit big numbers. Um, so yeah, it comes down to playing around with that, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I love that you're talking about looking at how are we planting in this room? How are we scheduling in this room? How does that impact labor? Right? How are we touching the plant? Not just plant touch count wise, but like how, right? Like you said, not
Yep.
topping them. So, I know the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about today was I know you're doing consulting. You've been working with some clients on that. Greenstar, right,
Yep.
is the name of the consulting entity. I know I've seen, some promotion for that on LinkedIn and stuff like that. So, where's that taking you? Like, what do you have going on? What are you doing with people? What do you see that people need today from somebody who's cultivation center consultant?
Training, staff training and staff coaching has been really the biggest thing for me. Um, like we talked about earlier, there's tons of good growers out there, and they're just not either not capable or don't really care about running a crew. They just want to grow really good weed.
Mm,
So having someone like me that can come in and work with them and understands the plant, but can work with the people and explain to the crew why we're doing things, what we're doing every single day, and the reasoning behind it, I think makes a huge difference on scaled projects for sure.
yeah, awesome. And are you doing that just in the US? You're doing that internationally?
I do have one client in Colombia. I have not been down there physically yet, so we just do phone calls like once or twice a week. But I'm working with their agronomist to basically just iron out their SOPs. She has a way that she was taught how to grow. So she has a set of SOPs, and she'll send them to me. I'll review them and kind of say, hey, you might want to think about not doing this process because um, it's not really necessary for the plant. I think if you take this process out, you guys are going to save money and it's not going to affect your yield. And so they'll go into one room and they'll try it for a cycle. And if they see good results, then we'll edit the SOPs and change it for the whole facility.
Awesome.
Um, I
Nice,
think
man.
I'm pretty good at workflow efficiency. So I've worked in some of the worst designed facilities in the country, and I can, you know, either see blueprints or walk into a facility, and in my mind, I immediately know how I want to set up the workflow for daily processes.
Awesome. No, that's great, man. That's great. Listen, Drew, I've so enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, man, this was
Uh,
great.
love to talk to you and get your perspective and hear your experience and really awesome that it again comes back to people for me. I think it comes back to people for you. If we
Yeah,
start there, we the plants and the money and all the stuff that we need to run a healthy cultivation business comes to us. So super cool to chop it up with you today, man. And thank you so much. If people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
you can check out my website, greenstargrower.com. I'm also on LinkedIn as Drew Greco. I'm on Instagram, Greenstar_grower. Um, any of those ways you can reach out to me.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, man. And hey, thanks everybody who's listening. Thank you so much for listening to this. Let us know if you got comments, you got questions for us, anything like that. And who knows? We'll post this on LinkedIn and maybe we'll get one of those big, huge, long, highly read posts where a lot of people are arguing over what was said here. I know
Yeah.
that so often you can say something like, I don't top my plants, and there's going to be 1,000 comments that you're an idiot, and there's going to be a
Yep.
thousand comments that like, well, I don't do it either, and everybody can argue over it. So maybe we
Yeah.
said some things that'll get people thinking. That's ultimately my goal, right?
Yeah.
Is like share information, make our industry better. What I say, rising tide lifts all ships. So
Yes, sir.
definitely want to see everybody be successful and continue to grow an industry that as for as long as I've been doing it and you've been doing it, man, lots of ups and downs.
Yep.
We keep coming back for more, so we
Yeah.
must love it. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, Drew, and thank you so much to everybody who joined us for this episode.
Thank you, Mark. That was great.